to welcome to stage David Romer, our program chair, who will formally introduce the center. David?
It's not very often that I say I don't have much to add beyond the poem that John Yates recited earlier. But I do just want to add one thing. It's not every time that we can introduce a politician beginning with, "I'm proud to introduce." And that's something that we can say today, just based on his moral vision, his moral voice, the work that he's done to support all of us here in Georgia and around the country. So it's a great honor to welcome our special guest today. It's going to be apolitical, as always, at Rotary, so Gina asks that all the Democrats please move to these tables on the left, and Republicans move to the right. And I can't see her, but I can feel what she's saying right now. So instead, I'll just say I'm very proud to welcome our very special guest, Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you all so very much. David, thank you for your kind and generous introduction. My thanks to John and ChatGPT for their generous introduction. It's wonderful to be back here at the Rotary Club. So grateful to be among friends, too many, too numerous to name. Enjoyed my conversation at the table with the folks who were here. David, I love the name of your company, Ideas United. I mean, that's just such a cool name. And grateful for the work that you do on behalf of our city. For more than a century, this club has stood as a beacon of leadership in the heart of Georgia, a community of Rotarians united by a simple but profound idea: service above self. I like that. Service above self. The one in whose name I preach every Sunday morning said that if you seek to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, in other words, if you would give yourself over to something bigger than yourself, you might actually find yourself. That is the Rotarian spirit. It is not just your motto, it is your mission to show up every day for your businesses, for your communities, for your neighbors. And I want to say that I'm deeply honored to represent you every single day in the United States Senate. I took a second to look at my watch, not because I'm in a hurry, but because I'm a Baptist preacher. And it can take a Baptist preacher 20 minutes, which is what they told me to talk, just to clear his throat. But it really is an honor for the people of your state to say that as we look into the eyes of our children and consider what we want, as a father, I can say what we want for those who are most precious to us. Because the one thing that even adversaries have in common, we all love our children. And for the people of your state to say, as we look into the eyes of our children and as we take stock of our mothers and fathers who are dealing with the blessings and the burdens of aging. I have an 87-year-old mother with Lewy body dementia. The moments with her are precious. But for the folks in your state to say, as we look at our children and our parents, and everybody in between, since we can't go to Washington, we're going to send you. And we're going to trust that in rooms of power, where decisions are being made and where deals are being cut, you're going to center the people rather than the politics. Since all of us can't go, we're going to invest you with that sacred responsibility. It is something that I take very seriously. And so it's always good to have time to spend at home, because what I promised Georgia was that I would always walk with you even as I work for you. And we're living through a moment where there are no simple answers to complicated questions, and people who give us answers that are too simple, we ought to be wary of those folks. But what we ought to commit to is that basic covenant, that for which the Rotarians have always stood for, that we stand together as one people, that we ought to be committed to that American covenant, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And so I say to you sincerely, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, even those of you who did not vote for me, raise your hand. I'm honored to work for you. And in this moment, we ought to commit ourselves to that basic covenant we have with one another as an American people, even when we have to disagree. Only in America is my story possible. And every single day I'm trying to fight for that kid who grew up in Caton Homes housing projects, the 11th out of 12 children. My folks were both Pentecostal preachers. Clearly, they read the scripture, Sam Chandler, be fruitful and multiply. But somehow I was able to make it. Somehow I caught hold of the vision of the poet who said, to everyone that openeth up a way and a way and a way. High soul climbs the highway while the low soul gropes the low. And in between on misty flats the rest drift to and fro, but to each one that openeth up a highway and a low, and each one must decide the way his soul would go. As an alum of Head Start, as an alum of Upward Bound, another federal program called TRIO that put a kid in the housing projects on a college campus every summer so that I could know that I belonged there. As someone who's been the beneficiary of Pell Grants and low-interest student loans, I'm fighting for that kid on Cape Street. And every variation of that kid in rural communities all across our state. And so in this moral moment, I hope that we will recommit ourselves to standing in the best of the Rotarian spirit, service over self. It's the reason why I'm deeply concerned about much of what is happening right now. I am worried about our country. My heart goes out to the thousands of CDC workers who have been and continue to do great work. Some of them are in this room, some of them you know. The challenge that our CDC workers have as the political debate rages on is that every single day they are saving us from stuff we don't even get to see. And I can tell you as someone who operates in the arena of politics that sometimes it's hard to get credit for the bad stuff you stop from happening. But I was at the CDC a few months ago, and I saw firsthand the work that they do to combat the maternal mortality crisis, which is acute in the United States of America. We have the dubious distinction among wealthy nations of having the highest maternal mortality rate. It is shamefully high. And it is especially high in a state like Georgia, where there are far too many counties that don't even have an OBGYN. And it is criminally high for black women, whose rates are 2 to 3 times the rate of their white sisters, even when they have the income and the insurance, which suggests that there is implicit bias in the system. And when we create a rhetoric of public policy that makes it illegal to investigate what clearly is a problem, it is a matter of life and death. It is not an argument between left and right. It's an argument between right and wrong. And so I continue to fight for the CDC because they're fighting for us. They address diseases like bird flu and malaria. They're conducting critical research on mental health and chronic illnesses, HIV, AIDS, gun violence, and so much more. Their work is paramount to our public health. And so when I saw the administration wage war against the folks who are fighting for us, I had to raise my voice. And as a result of that, I was able to get some of these CDC workers, hundreds of them, rehired. And the other day I had to put my activist shoes back on, put my boots on the ground, and stand there with the CDC workers. Because that's who I am in my bones. I sometimes look around and consider the work that I get to do in the United States Senate. Even with all the frustration going on, even with all the division, I still pinch myself every few days. I can't believe I get to do this work. We're in the midst of debating a reconciliation bill, and by the way, I always find it funny that we call it a reconciliation bill. If you know anything about how this actually works, you know that it is the opposite of reconciliation. One party has a trifecta, and so you get to push your way through the Congress, and the minority party has a little bit of voice, but not much. But the last time we were debating, they were debating a reconciliation bill, well, not the last time, but in 2017, they were debating a reconciliation bill during the first Trump administration. And they were passing a tax cut for the wealthiest of the wealthy while cutting health care for children. And I went to the Congress as the pastor of Ebenezer Church, standing there with other clergy. And I was arrested while singing and praying in the rotunda of the Capitol, fighting for the highest and the best in what I believe in, because Dr. King said that of all the injustices, inequality in health care is the most shocking and the most inhumane. So the Capitol Police arrested me in 2017 while they were debating the reconciliation bill and the farm bill. Well, I'm now on the agriculture committee. I'm helping to write the farm bill. And so every single day I try to bring those tools to my work in DC to stand up for farmers, to stand up for small businessmen and businesswomen, to create jobs and opportunity all across our state. Like many of you, I'm very concerned about these tariffs. I haven't met anybody yet who's excited about it. As I talk to business leaders, they are worried. I was down in my hometown of Savannah, Georgia, a couple of weeks ago, meeting with leaders at the port. I'm always proud when I drive into that Savannah port, Brunswick port. Georgia's a multimodal state. We got the world's fastest, busiest, most efficient airport, but we also have an incredible system of ports. And while there, I was talking to leaders and farmers and small businesses, and they feel the uncertainty. One gentleman involved with beekeeping to produce honey paid more than $25,000 in tariffs on his last import. He's a small business owner. He doesn't get to just move something around here or there and he'll be okay for the next quarter. He could lose his business. He does not know what he is going to do. He does not want to pass that cost on to the consumer, but understandably, he does not want to eat those costs himself. We're hearing stories like that across Metro Atlanta, where business owners and leaders are left scratching their heads because the math ain't mathing. They cannot plan in this uncertain, unpredictable environment. I talk to farmers, they have the same story. Key ingredient for fertilizer that they need is potash. Potash comes from Canada. Those tariffs, which we ought to call them what they really are, a tax, they will show up in a grocery store near you. And so this is such an important moment for business leaders to stand up, to raise your voices, to use your influence in the ways that you can. Now, I'm not naive. I know that when you're running a business, you want to stay as far from politics as you can. I don't blame you. But there comes a moment when that which is so fundamental to opportunity and possibility is at stake that we have to raise our voices. We have to use our influence. In the same way that you stand up and fight for tax cuts, stand up and fight for immigration policy that makes good business sense. As I'm talking to business leaders all across our state and all across our country, they know the truth. And that the truth is somewhere beneath the cacophonous noise and the games that Washington, D.C. plays. Talk to farmers. They'll tell you about their needs for labor, not just in the agriculture industry, but across sectors. We need common sense, reasonable, rational immigration policy, a secure border, give people who are here a dignified path to citizenship, uphold our values. We can do it as long as we don't let politics get in the way. Politics has a way of making things complicated that aren't that complicated. Let me give you one example. I was proud that a couple of years ago we passed the Inflation Reduction Act. And that too was a reconciliation bill. Again, it always tickles me that we call it reconciliation. That's not what we meant when we talked about reconciliation in seminary. It is raw power. But we passed the Inflation Reduction Act. It is a historic piece of legislation, the largest investment in clean energy and clean energy jobs in the history of humankind. And while it is a big lift to our country, let me tell you a secret, don't tell anybody else. Georgia did better than anybody. Don't tell the other states. But we really came out looking really good as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. I recently produced a report, you can get it from my office, which shows how far Georgia is relative to the other states. But in that same report that I released, I detailed how Georgia risks losing up to 42,000 good-paying jobs if the Congress does what it is contemplating doing in this reconciliation bill, repealing these clean energy credits. Listen, in less than 3 years, clean energy businesses in Georgia have announced 51 new projects worth over $28 billion. These projects are expected to add nearly 42,000 jobs across all corners of the state. And investment in clean energy manufacturing, including batteries, solar panels, and a place like Dalton, Georgia, known as the carpet capital of the world, is now the solar energy capital of the world. Electric vehicles, all of this increased by a factor of 10. But this could all fall to the wayside if cynical politicians get their way and they roll it all back in the name of politics that always chooses politics over people. And it is ironic that those who are in the party of power, I know y'all are nonpartisan, I just want us to have a good nonpartisan argument here. But those who are in power are targeting an industry that is directly benefiting Georgia communities and disproportionately benefiting those in Republican congressional districts. According to my report, in Georgia, nearly all the new investments and the new jobs are in counties outside of metro Atlanta. Nationwide analyses show that the vast majority of projects announced following the passage of these clean energy tax credits, over 3 and 4 projects have gone to House districts currently held by Republicans. But this is especially true in Georgia. 83% of the projects 94% of the total investment and 75% of the jobs are in Republican districts. Over 70% of the new investments and 83% of new jobs are in counties with median family incomes below the national median. And more than 95% of the new jobs and investments are in counties where the percentage of people with a bachelor's degree is below the national average. This is good news for Georgia, and to undermine it does not make good sense. It's hard to defend that. The data is clear. And so my colleagues have a decision to make about who they will fight for and what they believe in and who will they support. But this I do know, that uncertainty is never a friend of business, right? It's hard to know where to invest. If you're not certain about what's going to happen along the supply chain, it's hard to know that you should continue to lean in and invest in a clean energy future in Georgia if the Congress can simply undo 2 years later what it decided to do 2 years ago, right at the moment that we're beginning to make progress. And so, as I close, and nobody believes a Baptist preacher when he says, as I close, I simply want to say that I continue to fight for that kid who grew up on Cape Street in Caton Homes housing projects in Savannah, Georgia, because every now and then I see him. I see him in the eyes of a young man that I met not long ago at the DeKalb Peachtree Airport. At the time, I was a member of the Commerce Committee, and I was busy working on our FAA reauthorization, which is so critical to Georgia and to the Georgia economy. And I met this young man named Ezekiel at the DeKalb Peachtree Airport. He had that look in his eyes that you want to see in every child, that light. That light that shows up when a kid finds something that piques their curiosity, when they find their passion. Howard Thurman said, ask not what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and then go and do that. Because what the world needs is people who've come alive. Ezekiel had come alive. He wanted to be a pilot. He had the aptitude, he had the intellect, he had the discipline and the focus. But this young man, not a kid, this young man, 10 years later, and having spent $100,000 of his own money, Bernice, he was still trying to become a pilot. And it's because we've made the path for that young man too difficult. You have to have a certain number of hours, as you know, to become a pilot. And so he had to work a while, to go back to school a while. $100,000 later of his own money, that's how committed he was. 10 years later, still trying to become a pilot. We had not paved the runway smooth enough for that young man to take off. And so I got busy writing a piece of legislation called the Airways Act, which would begin to make sure that all of our kids, regardless of their neighborhood, their zip code, starting with kindergarten, have a path to become pilots, to take up jobs in the aviation space, which is a space starving for the brilliance that comes when we give every child a chance. And so that's why I was struck and deeply offended when a few weeks ago, early in the year, we had a tragic airplane crash coming out of the DCA airport. And while bodies were still in the chilly waters of the Potomac, and the investigation had not even begun, the leader of the free world said, I don't have to wait on an investigation. I know what crashed this plane. It's DEI. Now, I'm not invested in whatever you want to call DEI. Call it something else. I don't care. Here's what I know. I don't know what crashed that plane, but I assure you diversity didn't do it. It's one of the least diverse sectors in our economy. 96% of the pilots are white. Only 4% are women. I want America to win. And the way we win is to make sure that every child has a chance. We're going to need the brilliance of our young people in all sections of town, and all across Georgia, and all across America if we are to win. And so every now and then I go back to Cape Street and Caton Homes housing projects. They've changed the name to Raphael Warnock Way, the street where I grew up. And it's not a long street, it's easy to miss. I didn't fight for a longer, more prominent street. It's just a street right in the middle of the housing projects. But I wanted them to change that name since they said they wanted to name a street. Change the name of the street I grew up on. Because I want the next kid who's growing up on that street to know that in America, anything is possible. It's our job to tell our children that in America, anything is possible. No excuses. Get up early, get dressed, put your shoes on, do the work, sit your butt in the seat, learn the lesson, because in America, anything is possible, but it is also our job to make sure that when we tell our children that it is actually true. That is our mission in this moment.
Thank you very much. We'll start off with a couple questions here and then open it up to everybody. Last time you were here, you mentioned that you were almost going to join Rotary, but then you got elected. My first question is, how often do you regret that?
Not often.
All right, good. There's still hope for you in the future. Second question, as I was driving in, I was talking to Vern. Everybody here loves Vern. He is A, a nice guy, B, he validates our parking. And for that, I asked, what he would ask you, and he just said, I don't know, it's crazy out there. How do you wake up? How do you think about what to prioritize? How do you think about making sense of all those complications that you talked about that are happening for so many people in the country right now?
Yeah. There's no question that these are tough times. The days are dark. And if you watch the news too much, you might get sick. So even I withdraw. I can't withdraw from what's going on, but I'll go and ride my bike or something and come back. Self-care is important. But I think, David, in response to your question, part of what you have to do is take the long view. I mean, for me as a faith leader, in a sense, that's what faith is. Faith that is mature, faith that is not simply denial and just empty, pithy religious rhetoric. Faith that is deep takes the long view. It recognizes that there are moments in the world that are evil, that there are seasons and chapters in life that are decidedly difficult and tough. And that when you take stock of the American story, it is not linear. It doesn't move unbroken and in an uncomplicated way towards progress. But we have seen progress. And so it comes in fits and starts. There are moments when the democracy expands. There are moments when it contracts. And the contractions are painful. But many of the women in the room can tell you that while the contractions are painful, the contractions are necessary for birth. And so the question is, what are we going to do with this moment? I think America is having yet another dance with that virus that I call COVID-19. It has mutated over time, but it keeps coming back. And so hopefully we will learn the lessons of this moment so that the democracy can expand, which I think is good for everybody. I know it's good for everybody. And so I would urge people to keep the faith, to raise your voice. Don't give in to those who are trying to weaponize despair. Part of how tyranny works is that it works to convince you that they've already won. And so when you think the battle is over, you stop fighting. And what I ask myself every single day is, who am I to stop? Who am I to give up? I was John Lewis's pastor. And the night before I was to preside over his funeral, I asked myself, as I was looking at footage and thinking about his life, what was John Lewis thinking when he was crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge? He and Hosea Williams, two who would come to be two great Atlantans. What were those young men thinking with trench coats walking across that Edmund Pettus Bridge? Brute force with the sanction of government on the other side of that bridge, ready to literally trod on them. Was he thinking that at the end of his life he would have a funeral that would cause the whole nation to pause? 3 American presidents would be there on both sides of the aisle to pay him tribute? Come on, he wasn't thinking about that. Couldn't have imagined it. Was he thinking he'd be the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom? That wasn't on his mind. I think he was just trying to stay alive that day so he could fight the next day. But by some stroke of human resilience mingled with grace, he crossed the bridge and built the bridge at the same time. And decades later, I and John Ossoff crossed that bridge, first African-American senator, first Jewish senator, representing the state of Georgia. And so if he didn't give up, I can't give up. If Viola Luiso didn't give up, if Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman didn't give up, these are my examples, these are my heroes. If Coretta Scott King didn't give up. And so I just keep fighting and I try to keep the faith.
Thank you. Given the length of my introduction, we only have time for a few questions from the audience. This is my fault, but we can line up if any members have questions. For my other question, how do you take kind of what's happening at the federal level and help translate that for what happens in Georgia? You mentioned the CDC or Medicaid or tariffs. How do we think about that from a more of a state level?
Yeah, for me, it always comes back to Georgia. And what can I do for my constituents who are here? I'm still hoping Georgia will expand Medicaid. We're one of 10 states that's digging in our heels. Our legislature still hasn't decided to expand Medicaid. And what that means is that we're leaving a lot of working poor people uncovered. And I can make the moral argument for that, but I'm going to skip over that. You know I can make the moral argument for it. I believe in health care. But it's a drag on the Georgia economy. And so I would encourage our business leaders, because let me make the answer short, to investigate that. It is a drag on the Georgia economy to have working people uncovered. All we're doing is subsidizing health care in other states. And I believe in work. I told you my dad used to wake me up every morning, get up, get dressed, put your shoes on. I believe in work. But the way to incentivize work is not through work reporting requirements. The way to get more people to work is to have a healthier workforce and to accept the Medicaid expansion.
Thanks. David.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you, Senator Warnock, for being here today. It's an honor to have you here. I'm David Leiter. I'm a tax partner with KPMG. And so when you started talking about the reconciliation tax bill, I got really excited. So my question is, it seems like this is a unique opportunity for leaders in the Democratic Party to make a difference. The current version would potentially add $4 trillion to the national debt over 10 years. Between the Freedom Caucus or Republicans in blue states, it seems like there could be dialogue across the aisle to create a better solution. James Carville would say, hey, this is a time to let the Republicans get what they want because they can't govern. It's a rope-a-dope strategy, right? So what's your perspective on playing rope-a-dope or engaging in dialogue across the aisle to create results?
Yeah. No, thank you so much for the question. And you'll be heartened to know that I'm on the Finance Committee. I advocated to get on that committee, so I deal with tax all the time, which I don't find it to be as exciting as you seem to think it is. In fact, I think they put the preacher on the Finance Committee so that I could tell a story about, this boring, complicated stuff and try to bring it home. But no, I'm glad to be on the Finance Committee because of the things that I care about. And I'm the ranking member on trade. So the debates around tariffs, I'm at the center of that debate. I would hope that we could find a bipartisan path that makes sense in terms of tax policy. When I came to the Senate in 2021, we passed in our reconciliation bill something called the expanded child tax credit. Child tax credit is a tax cut for working class people. That's what it is. It's a tax cut for middle class people. The problem we had before 21 was that some people were too poor to get it. And so we passed something called the expanded child tax credit. And as a result of that, we cut child poverty in America by more than 40%. If you say, well, I didn't feel it, it's because we only did it for 6 months. But for 6 months, we cut child poverty in our country and in Georgia by about 40%. But because we didn't extend it, we went back and doubled child poverty. So what I would like to see is some kind of reasonable path that understands the importance of investments, say in R&D, research and development, which gives America a competitive edge. So I support that. But I also support investments and tax policy that supports children and families that have children, because that also gives us a necessary competitive edge. And we were close, I think, to something that held both of those things in tension, but the closer we got to the election last year, the harder it became, and then folks sort of backed away from the table. But I'll be there pushing both for Georgia businesses and for Georgia families. I resist the idea that it's one or the other. I want businesses to thrive because when businesses thrive, families thrive, but we need some path that ensures that people can actually enjoy some of the prosperity that they're creating for others.
Thanks. And before the next question, I'll say quickly, it's been an honor to serve as program chair. I wouldn't be possible without my colleague Harry, who's made a lot of this possible, and we're not counting down, but only 5 more programs until this gentleman takes over. Keith Parker, a big round of applause.
Oh, wow. I was not expecting that. Always good to see you, Senator.
Good to see you, Keith.
In fact, let me first publicly thank you. When I first moved to Atlanta, end of 2012, I moved here on a Friday. First visit that Sunday was to Ebenezer, and you recognized me in the office, in the audience. Pulled me in the back to your office and gave me a few words of wisdom about how to navigate Atlanta. So thank you for that. So my question is near and dear to your heart. It's on healthcare. So I've served on a health system board for more than 8 years. And one of the things in our health system actually is a university health system. And one of the things we recognized was that the typical students coming out of medical school, for white students, the average debt load was around $225,000. And for African American students, it was actually in excess of $400,000. I don't know if Valerie's here in the audience or not.
She's here, and she'd be glad to talk about that, I'm sure.
But and so you were talking earlier about the math ain't mathin'. So when we tell African American students that by the time you're making money, probably in your early 30s, you'll be saddled with this enormous amount of debt. How do we incentivize folks to still make that choice, pick up all that debt, but then to go into a profession that's now being automated in a lot of ways and so many other things? How do we get them to join that noble profession of healthcare? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. And the short answer is we've got to make a different set of choices in terms of our public policy. People are going to make rational decisions for their lives. I told you the story of Ezekiel in the aviation sector. But yeah, I mean, all of the hurdles in terms of the costs. I pushed President Biden to live up to his campaign promise. And as you know, we did billions of dollars of student debt relief last year and the year before that. And I would go in rooms and I'd ask if you or somebody you know has gotten student debt relief, raise your hand, and hands would go up all over the building. Do I think that's the long-term solution? No. I mean, we've got to get the cost of education, college education, which has run ahead of inflation now for decades. We got to get the costs under control. And we've got to make a different set of choices. Over time, the federal government has shifted more and more responsibility for the costs to states. And now with this new bill that they're pushing, this big bill, which I don't think is beautiful, they're looking to shift even more costs to states. So thank you for the question. It's something that I remain focused on. I think it's in our enlightened self-interest to ensure that, first of all, we are doing everything we can for our kids beginning in preschool. My friends Mindy and Stephanie, I was on the board of Gears for a few years. They taught me how important 0 to 3 is. And I haven't forgotten that. I continue to work on that. So we got to work on that space. I'm going to close with this bad news. A lot of brilliant people in this room. The bad news is you'll never be as smart as you were when you were 3. It all went downhill after that. If you really want to change the world, you invest in 0 to 3 or 4 years old. So we've got to do that, because a lot of our kids lose so much long before they even can think about getting to medical school. And we've got to deal with the equity question in K through 12. So when you get rid of the Department of Education, you make it very difficult to deal with that, with those equity issues, because education is largely funded at the state level. But when you're talking about equity and other kinds of programs, all of that is administered through the Department of Education. So that has implications for the question that you're asking. And then we need to make school more affordable, not just medical school, but technical and community colleges as well. Thank you.
Senator, thank you for your outstanding remarks. And we will take that last comment as your call to action, Senator. So we're going to have a series of call to actions coming out of this meeting. We appreciate, again, everything you've done. David, thank you for lining this meeting up. Please note our upcoming meetings, particularly the next one next week, again, Memorial Day. Following week, we've got Dean Erica James from the Wharton School. Please come up and thank the Senator. Thank you, and have a wonderful Memorial Day.